Hello, I'm Mary Ito, and welcome to Cram. Thanks for joining me as we explore new and innovative research and big ideas that may change the way you think and act. We all lie. Really, pretty much all of us do. It doesn't matter how old you are, unless you're very, very young, what gender you are, what culture you're from, lying is universal. This is the second part of our discussion on lying with Kang Lee. Now, if you missed part one, I highly recommend that you listen to it because the information that came out of that podcast, well, I found it pretty startling. We talked about how lying starts in children as young as 2 years of age. We talked about why they might lie, the different kinds of lies, whether they would lie for their parents, and whether anyone can tell if a child is lying. Today, we're going to explore lying as we age. What happens to lying when we become teens and then adults? Does the nature of lying change? Kang Lee is a world-renowned expert on lying. He's a professor of applied psychology and human development at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. Welcome back, Kang.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
Now, just before we get into teens and aging and lying, I want to talk a little bit about children and lying. Just revisit that and recap some of the information that came out of that previous podcast. Can you just briefly go over what you feel are the most important findings about children and lying?
Mm-hmm. So children begin to lie as young as 2.5 years of age. And at that age, children typically, about 30% of kids will lie. But by about 7, the majority of children will lie. So lying is a normal part of our development. And most of children who tell lies at the early stage is not really a bad sign. They are not going to develop into a criminal, let's say, in adulthood. So parents should be assured of that. And also, I want to point out that the parents should not be very confident about themselves being able to detect their own children's lies. They actually, most of the time, they cannot. So these are the three main things I want to convey to the parents.
Yeah, I found that last fact was pretty unsettling, that we can't tell even if our own children are lying half the time, right? It's pretty random.
Exactly.
Well, yeah. So, parents don't want to have lying increase, right? They don't want to nurture lying. They would rather prevent their children from lying. So we didn't get a chance to talk about that. And you've done quite a few different kinds of studies looking at that. What did you find?
Yeah, so the thing, I'll maybe just pick up where we left off. Last time we talked about parenting by lying. That is, a lot of parents actually lie to their kids in the name of parenting. I think that, to me, is probably the last thing you should do. Because by doing so, we have found that kids with parents who do parenting by lying a lot tend to lie back to their parents, and they eventually develop mental health problems later on in life. So the first thing I would say, one thing we should not do as a parent is not to lie to them in the name of parenting. So that's number one. And another thing we also looked at is to look at whether or not, you reason with your kids, talk to their kids about how important truth-telling is and how bad lying is. Is that going to help your kids to be honest? And turns out it does not. So no matter how you talk to them, it doesn't make your child more honest. So having more discussions about truth, the benefit of truth telling, goodness of truth, being honest, and the badness or negativity of lying, it's not good going to promote your child's honesty.
Really?
So,
I find that so hard to believe.
I know, exactly. But you come to think of this, we adults, most of us know lying is wrong in most of the situations.
Okay.
But we adults lie anyway.
Right.
So just think about this. Sometimes we don't put our kids in the adult's perspective. Just think about this. Because our behaviors, moral behaviors, are not entirely driven by our moral principles. in many situations, the situational factors are so strong, they're so influential, we sometimes just follow the situation rather than follow the moral principles. So a child is more likely than adults to do that because sometimes they are caught up in a situation. They just want to get them out of the situation, and they are not going to remember the moral principles at that moment. So at that moment, they say, how can I do to get myself out of trouble?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I get it.
Likely to tell a lie to
So
cover it up.
let me just ask you then, see, because then do we get back into that whole question of nature nurture? And is this a natural inclination to lie? Is that what children are falling back on? And that's why they don't listen to their parents' moral argument.
Exactly. So the reason, again, I mentioned last time is just think about the power structure in your family.
Yeah.
In the power structure in families, parents have all the political, physical, and economical power in the family. A child is really, a subordinate to the family structure. So the child is not powerful enough, and they cannot protect themselves to get out of trouble using other means. So what's the best way for them to get out of trouble is that by simply moving their lips. If they can figure it out, they can use words to influence their parents. They just do it. So this is a very adaptive strategy for a child in this kind of family structure.
So wait a second, though. I thought of something. So when you said parents should not be telling their children lies, right? Those parenting lies that sometimes we do, because sometimes we think it's actually in the best interest of our child, but we still lie.
Yes.
But then if what you say is true, that it's very difficult to tell if a child is lying, would the reverse be true, and that a child has difficulty telling when a parent is lying? So how does a child, so then how does a child really know if a parent is lying?
Yes. So this is something very interesting. Some parents, I mentioned last time, some parents actually would say, if you don't, my vase is broken. And if you tell me it's true, you broke it, I would not be upset, right? But then the child then would tell the truth to the parent. But the parent become upset. And this is a very strong teachable moment for the child. The child says, oh, my mom doesn't really say this, doesn't really act what she says she's going to act. So now I learned this lesson. Next time, I better not to be honest about this. So what happens is, so that's why I said that, as parents, unfortunately, the kids lie many times to us, but we as adults, we should try to be honest in front of the kids. We cannot, I think one of the things is we, as parents, we sometimes underestimate our children's ability to understand and to cope. For example, one of the parenting lies people tell is about their family pet. For example, the pet dies, right? So let's say the pet dies, and the parents say, well, my kids is so young, I should protect her or his emotional well-being. So let's not talk about it. Let's just say something different. Oh, I send the dog to the uncle's farm. He lives there, happy, free, running around. That sounds very reasonable and well justified. But now imagine your child discovers this a few years later by whatever reasons. So there's a very big contrast. Your child can realize is, hey, mom said, my dog was sent to uncle's farm, but how come, she didn't tell me the truth, right? So these are the teachable moments to them about whether or not they ought to be honest and whether or not the parents are honest. Because sometimes another thing we as parents, sometimes we don't think about it. We do it and then in front of our kids. So we basically tell the children, remember I mentioned the example of, you take your child to a friend's house for dinner and the food was terrible. And you said, oh, your food is wonderful. And then you come home and they complain to your spouse, say, hey, the food is terrible. And the child is sitting there, say, hey, just a few hours ago, you were in so-and-so's house and you said the food was wonderful. What happened here? right?
Yeah,
So they're
right.
very,
It's all these
teachable.
mixed messages. It's like,
Exactly.
yeah, uh-huh.
Exactly. So then the kids can learn, can make inferences about this.
Okay. Okay. So the whole moral argument persuasion does not work. That's
Yes, but
okay.
but I do
Right.
have to tell parents. So
Yes.
once you catch your child telling a lie, it
Yeah.
is a teachable moment to have discussions about what is a lie and what is the truth. What are the consequences of telling a lie and telling the truth? And then the moral aspect of it. I think this is a good point to talk about it. The reason for that is children are learning about the concept of truth and lying. So it's good
Mm.
for parents to teach your kids about these concepts and the moral implications of them. But you don't use that as a way to promote honesty. So that's what I'm saying. So they can learn about it, but it does
Ah.
not translate into actions from the child's end. But children have to know about these concepts because they are very essential in our everyday life. When kids
Yes.
interacting with others, they are able to pinpoint something happened and they say, oh, that is a lie. That's truth telling and that's honesty. That's
Okay.
the dishonesty. So they have to learn conceptually about these things, but you don't use that discussion to think you can make your child more likely to be honest.
Okay.
Imagine, we have done studies with kids who are from highly religious families, and they go to church, every week.
Mm-hmm.
And then, they learn a lot of things from the Bible, for example. But they come to some places and they lie. So disconnect is always there. So the disconnect. So they learn from church about the importance of truth telling. Well, thou shalt not lie, one of the 10 commandments, right? So just think about it. So but at the same time, they do have to learn. So these important concepts, such as honesty, dishonesty, truth
Mm-hmm.
telling, lying, and things like that.
You know what, though? Do we really know what the impact is of, let's say, religion and moral codes that we're taught at a young age to follow? Because we don't have the situation where we're raised without those. Do you know what I'm saying? You can't take the same person and then start over again and not have those exist. So we don't have the absence of them, right?
Indeed.
Yeah. So how do we not know whether they have had some kind of impact in the way we're brought up?
This is very important. So, how we behave morally, and how we being brought up,
Yeah.
mainly through modeling, through watching others in your environment doing things. So we learn from each other by very keenly observing how others do things, and we learn the social norms by how others do things. So, and to me, that's very, very powerful. That's why I said in the last episode, I said, parents have to model honesty. You don't don't
Right.
preach. Preach is not quite useful. Humans do not like to be preached to, and they don't really listen very carefully. But they are very keen observers of others. So they know, what is right and what is wrong by observing others doing. So to me, that is the most important thing. So, learning by observation. And
Right.
that begins as soon as we are born. So we learn to observe others instinctually. So this is genetically encoded. So we, watch others and learn from their behaviors.
So is that kind of the conclusion that that's the best thing that parents can do to keep their kids honest? They need to model honesty.
Exactly.
Themselves.
So to me, this is the most important thing that you can think of, take home with. This is modeling and create a honest environment, which is a home or school. And you also associate your kids with honest kids, right? So then if they have friends who are honest, and they are going to be honest. So this is the environment you create for your child is extremely important. When I say environment, is really about how people behave. So your child is engaged with a bunch of other kids who are dishonest and they have misconducts, then your kids are going to learn from that and then become someone with conduct disorders, for example.
Mm.
So I think it's so observational learning. So in psychology, that's a very, very powerful discovery in psychology in the last century is observational learning. And that's a super, super powerful. And then this is for humans everywhere. And from very young age, almost as soon as you're born, basically, all the way to the day you die, you observe others, you learn.
So then, Kang, what kind of strategies can parents use to help keep their kids kind of on the straight and narrow path?
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned, the parents should not lie to their kids, not do parenting by lying. There are also other strategies you can set up to help your kids to be honest. For example, you can ask your child to promise you to answer your question honestly. So, for example, if you find the vase is broken, you say, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to promise me you are going to answer my question truthfully. And then if the child says, I promise, it turns out children are more honest after they have made a promise. And the interesting thing about this is the kids actually do not know what a promise is. So you can't do this to a 2-year-old. You say a 2-year-old who does not know what a promise is. As long as you say, can you promise me when I ask you the next question, can you promise me you're going to tell me the truth? That if the child says, I promise, and the child is more likely to be honest.
And the child doesn't even really know what a promise is.
Exactly. So which is so interesting. I still haven't really figured out why kids would do this, but this is just a very powerful tool to just ask kids to promise. But kids are also very tricky. So sometimes they will say, okay. Instead of say, I promise I'm going to tell the truth, the child says, okay, right? You think that's the same. As a parent, sometimes, in the heat of the moment, you say that's good enough, right? Child says, okay, No, that's not okay. If they say okay, and they're going to lie to you.
My goodness. They actually have to say the words. Right.
Yes.
So oh my goodness. So though in saying those words, let's just say a child does understand, right? But so for the child who understands what a promise is it sort of that full commitment because they had to say the word promise. Now they're fully committed to this.
Yes. So this is something about the power of language. Somehow kids learn from very young age. My word has very, very big weight on it. It's my commitment.
Yeah.
So it's like we adults say, let's shake on it. To a kid, the shaking on it is really what they say. I promise I'm going to do this. So if they say okay, it's not commitment to them. So therefore, they lie. So we learned this hard way. We didn't know this until we did a study about this. So in one situation, we told the parents, you make sure you get the promise from your child. Don't let them say okay. And then we also have another situation where we say okay is okay, and the kids behave very differently. So try this for all the other situations in your life when you're dealing with your kids. So you just ask them to promise. So that is very, very powerful.
That's, well, you got to get to the bottom of why a child would still tell the truth if they don't understand what promise means. I find that fascinating. You know what?
This is,
And the other thing too, I would guess that act has more weight if the parent himself or herself, themselves, keeps their own promises.
Yes.
Because if a child sees constantly that a parent breaks their promise, then what does that mean?
Exactly. So this is something I mentioned last time as well. So a promise to a child is a very, very, very big commitment. So, for example, if a parent says, I'm going to take you out for dinner for your birthday, right? Or I'm going to, buy this toy for you for your birthday. But the parent, for some reason, let's say, it's out of stock. So the parent fails to deliver. A child considers that to be lying. So they would say, "You lied to me." You lied to me. This to the child is very, very, or very, very extremely offensive. So to a child, your word is also carries a lot of weight. So don't do something that to break
that trust that, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So exactly. So Mary, you're totally correct. So as a parent, we need to live up to our promises. And then one of the important things we have to do is when we promise our child, if they confess, we're not going to be upset and we're not going to punish them. We have to, make commitment and live up to our words.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyhow, so can I move on to the next thing we discovered?
Yeah.
So probably you remember when you were a kid, parents probably told you about, the boy who cried wolf, they read you stories about Pinocchio, right? And a lot of parents use these kind of stories, including my mom, to discourage me from learning to tell lies, right?
Right.
But somehow, the question, it was always for me, because my mom only had one story she could tell orally without, reading a book. That was the boy who cried wolf. So I learned, heard that story so many times. So I wondered whether or not this story actually was any good. Is that going to promote children's honesty?
Right.
So we did a study. We did quite a few years. So we did the studies with this. We discovered that the boy who cried wolf the story does not promote honesty at all. So you read the story to kids, kid will still lie to you. Then we thought maybe, so the story we told to kids was the original classic story in which the boy actually got eaten by wolf.
Okay.
I don't know whether or not your parents told you that story.
I know the story, yeah.
The sanitized story in which the boy just got punished, not eaten by the wolf.
Right.
It's Disney version of this. But we thought that was not good enough, so we used the classic Aesop story, and it's totally useless. Then we thought, maybe because death is a concept difficult for young kids to understand. So if you threaten kids about if you lie, you're going to die, the child may not understand it. Mm-hmm. So then we looked at the Pinocchio story, because the Pinocchio story tells a story that if you lie, there's immediate punishment, right? Your nose is going to grow.
Right.
So we thought maybe, a young child would understand this immediate punishment. So we told the Pinocchio story to kids as well, the classic story. So there's a lot of punishment, and not just in one situation, but multiple situations.
Right.
And it still has no effect whatsoever on children's truth telling. So they still continue to lie. So these two classic stories are totally useless. So I was at that time I was in the United States. So I was at the University of California, San Diego. So I came across the George Washington story. So George Washington story is a very interesting story. So this is a story most of the American elementary school kids will learn from their textbooks. Almost everybody in the United States will know if they have gone through the elementary school system in the United States. So George Washington, I don't know, Canadians are not quite familiar
maybe you
with
should tell the story for people who don't know the story. Yeah.
So the story goes like this. So George Washington got a gift from his father. It's an axe. And George Washington loves the axe. So he goes around and uses it to chop this, chop that. And one day he chopped down his father's favorite cherry tree. Right? His father discovered that the cherry tree was chopped down. So he asked, who chopped down the cherry tree? So, and George Washington, as a young boy, he said, I cannot lie. So, Dad, I chopped down your cherry tree. Right? Then George Washington's father said, I would rather have one honest boy than 1,000 cherry trees. So that's the story. Mm-hmm. Okay, so everybody in the United States, would know about this story. So, but interestingly, so the story actually never happened. So this is a lie. So this is a made up story. So it never happened to George Washington. So we took the story and we read to Canadian kids.
Okay.
Because then we make sure they have never heard of this story. So, and then we told the story to them. It turned out this story worked So this story significantly made children more likely to be honest. So,
oh my goodness. Why? Why do you think that story?
Yeah. So then to think about the story, okay, the Pinocchio story and the boy who cried wolf story were stories you actually tell them, if you lie, something bad is going to happen to you.
Right.
But in the George Washington story, you say, if you tell the truth, good thing is going to happen to you. You're not going to be punished, but not only you're not going to be punished, you're going to be praised by an adult, right? So, but in order to prove that scientifically, so we changed the story. The ending of the story, we said George Washington lied about it, and then his father discovered it. That George Washington chopped down the cherry tree and lied about this, and he was scolded by his father. So then we turned this classic story into a negative ending story. And once we do that, kids lying shoot up. So it tells you, because when we write moral stories, as you can see going through the human history, when we're writing moral stories, we always try to threaten children. Yeah. Always tell them the negative side of it.
Right.
So most of the stories are all very, very negative. But the George Washington story is a very unique story in that moral story in that sense. It actually tells you the positive side of the story. So somehow kids more likely to be receptive to the positive stories, moral stories, than the negative moral stories. So this is my general hypothesis. I haven't really done additional studies. I wish others would do it in other domains to see whether or not, moral stories with positive versus negative messages and how they impact on children's moral behavior. To me, that would be very, very useful from an educational.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, is it too much of a leap to go from a story to real life and say that having a positive outcome in a teachable moment rather than going to punishment is a better way, and that children learn more from that? I don't know. Is that too much of a leap?
No, I don't think that's too much of a leap. I think it's the children, of course, behave sometimes out of fear of punishment. Yeah. And in order to get them out of this fear, to act in a different way, we need to foster a positive environment and give them positive messages so that they would not react in the way that we typically react, is fight, flight in a situation of stress. So I think, I don't think that's a big leap to say that, we need to be, doing something positive to the child, telling them more things about more positive to the kids, but not negative ones. For example, smoking is another example. We've been doing this for years, spend millions of dollars, put very disgusting photos on the cigarette boxes. Yeah. Kids still would learn to smoke. And the reason for that is that these things, the threats, do not work for kids for some reason, which we still need to study. But, from what my study, we realize, at least for moral teaching, positive messaging is better than negative messaging.
Yeah. And you know what I like about the way that George Washington story ends? He says, I'd rather have this one honest boy, right, than 1,000 cherry trees. It's not that he gives him a reward. He doesn't say, here's a cookie, or here's whatever. No, he doesn't have to give him anything. It's the sentiment that he gives to his son, there's value, that honesty is valued so highly. I'd rather have you than 1,000 trees. And that's so good. And the children accept that.
Yes, you're right. The message is not about, lying is good or cutting down cherry tree is good. It's just, I value honesty so much, right? You convey this moral to your child. Yes.
Oh, okay. So we got to move on here. This is so interesting. Yes. So now what happens as kids get older? You were talking about, how lying 30% when kids are around in 2.5 or so, right? And then it starts to increase, and then it starts to decrease again, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it goes. So started with 30% at about 2.5 years of age. Yeah. And you get 50% 80% 3 years of age and 80% 4 years of age. You get 7 years of age and beyond. You get about 90 and over almost 100%, all the way up to 11 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
And then from 12 years of age, then the lying rate declines steadily. So we have for the kids all the way up to about 16 years of age. But we haven't done anything beyond that. But this trend is very encouraging. That is, the kids become less dishonest. So this is also was, at least to me, was surprising. I always thought teenagers are the most dishonest group of kids.
Teenagers get such a bad rap.
Exactly. So they're actually doing better than this. So I think, so by adolescence, kids actually learn the moral values of society through observation, as I mentioned, mostly through observation and through their own cognitive development. And they also learn how to control their behaviors. So through all these kind of confluence of things, I think kids actually become more rational and more in self-control. And then they also become more moral. Kids are moral kids. So most of the kids are moral. So they start to behave morally, not as younger children who kind of, behave in response to the situations. And older kids, on the other hand, tend to behave more morally. So they look at the situation, they know the natural instinct is to lie, but then they somehow overcome it with their better developed cognitive control, their morality, and then they behave morally. So this is not only about lying, actually. So, for example, in terms of racism, in terms of prejudice, and you see teenagers actually have much reduced racial bias than younger children. So this is a totally different topic, but so there are things we should cherish about the adolescent years, because during this period they become more moral and they behave more morally. So and it's something we should celebrate as well. But unfortunately, I have not spent a lot of time with teenagers in my research, and I wish someone else would do it, and I wish I have had more time working with them to learn more about their lying and honesty and things like that.
Right. Yeah. No. Right. So I know that you've concentrated mostly on children, right? Your work has been on children and young teens, but there certainly is a fair amount of research, of literature out there about lying and adults. That you're familiar with. So what do we know about that? So as children become teens and then they move into adulthood, what do we know about lying and adults? Is it just as prevalent, I'm assuming pretty much all adults lie. Nothing changes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I don't. So some people have done diary studies. So basically, they carried a beeper in the old days. So let's say every hour, and there was a beep, and you'd write down, okay, in the last hour, how much did I lie? So you write down yes or no. You answer the question, and you write down about what you lied. So it turned out that we lie quite frequently on a daily basis. And just because of the situations in your environment, and you lie. So I think you lie possibly. This is the stats varied dramatically from one study to another. One study reported you lie about twice a day. But sometimes put the number much higher. So I don't think these numbers are accurate in a sense. It's not representative of the whole population, but it does tell you the frequency of lying. Similar to possibly to what you see in the younger kids. That is, most people lie. That's number one, as you said. And then we lie, per day, maybe twice, 3 times. And then, but the key is when you look at what kind of lies they tell.
Right.
They tell exactly kind of lies we tell as kids. And for exactly the same reasons.
Oh.
So, for example, most of the lies we tell are innocuous. As I mentioned to you in the last episode, we hardly ever tell lies to get others into trouble.
Right.
We typically tell lies to get ourselves out of a jam, So that is most of the lies we tell. Another lies we tell is to be nice, to white lies, to spare others' feelings, you run into your colleague, your colleague has a nice suit, you has a new suit, and the colleague says, how do you like my suit? What they're going to say, if you don't like it, you say, oh, that's great. Looking great in this, right? Sometimes, your spouse says, do you think I have gained a few pounds? And your answer should be no, right? So I would never say yes to my wife. I would be in trouble for the next month, So I learned my lesson. So, in front of my wife, I would.
Kang, I'm just going to tell you really quickly that happened to me once when my husband was trying to pull the zipper up a dress I hadn't worn in many years, and he was having trouble. And I said, why is it taking so long to get that zipper up? And his response was, oh, I don't know. It just seems that your weight seems to have been distributed differently now.
Oh, he's very smart. He's very smart. And I would do more than that. I would say because something's wrong with the zipper.
That's good. Yeah, that would have been good.
Let off, then just totally not touching
he shouldn't have, because he still couldn't help but be kind of honest, exactly. And of course I paused for and then I realized, wait a second. Are you telling me I'm fat, but just in a different way?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway.
So that the majority of lies, according to these diary studies, tend to be these kind of lies. So, and then the reason we lie is always the same. And number one is to get out of trouble. Number two is to be nice to others, follow the rules. Number three is sometimes to win competition. There are situations that could be competitive.
Right.
And then in order to win competition, then you kind of lie about it. So these are the three main reasons we lie.
Now you've done really interesting work with young adults who are in post-secondary education, and you looked at whether they lie or they cheat during exams. Mm-hmm. I mean, what did you find from that?
Yeah, so this will be we can talk about this for hours. So this is what I'm doing, right? Since about more than 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So that we have discovered is that students actually cheat a lot. So if you give them a questionnaire, say, do you cheat? So they will say, yes, I cheat, but the rate will be like 20-30%. But when you do the real experiments, you set them up in the classroom, and then to see whether or not they are going to cheat. The cheating rate is much higher, in the neighborhood of about 50-60%, even higher, if there's nobody supervising the room. But if there's a professor proctoring the exam, the cheating rate is about 35-36%. So, but if you ask the students afterwards, in the last exam, did you cheat? And they will say, no, I didn't cheat. So what they tell you is different from the actual behavior. So this is something that we have found consistently with adults and with kids is what you say is different from what you do. So you remember I mentioned if you ask them, have you ever cheated? They say, yes, I've cheated. The cheating rate is 30%, right? But this self-report of cheating is not related to their actual cheating behavior in the exam they just did. So right now, like all over the world, because of the pandemic, a lot of exams are done, without any supervision. And some universities would ask students to sign a pledge. I pledge or I promise I'm not going to cheat. But that pledge doesn't work. So students still would cheat. So
maybe they actually need to verbally say in front of a teacher, I promise that I didn't cheat or that I'm not going to cheat or however. Maybe they need to actually, just like those little kids who had to say, I promise.
That's what they should do. Yeah. So another thing we discovered is a lot of universities don't do is the universities make assumption students will remember the university policy against academic dishonesty. So they actually don't say anything. So they don't. So what we have done is we basically ask students to read the university policy against academic dishonesty before the exam. And by doing that,
Oh.
their cheating rate dropped significantly. So just remind them.
Oh.
So we give them two kinds of
Yeah.
reminders. One is remind them the general policy. That's one situation. Another situation, we tell them about a particular case of a student who cheated and got disciplined because of cheating. So either way, student cheating rate goes down. So that tells you, students, just like kids, need to be reminded a little bit about, the negativity, the potential consequences of cheating if they are being caught.
Gee, I guess, it makes me think it doesn't matter how old we are. Maybe we need these constant reminders about how we should act, in a civil society, right? We constantly need to be reminded, or we keep slipping back to these behaviors that, aren't the best, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the economists have, they are a group of economists. They are called behavioral economists, and they have figured out a way of try to get people behave in a way, that to be nice to each other in a civil society. So, one of the things they do is called nudges. So nudges are things very subtle, and they're not very upfront and like a TV advertisement, but a message is someone sitting there, you don't hardly ever notice. But somehow by having these kind of messages there, we behave better. So, for example, if you just simply put a pair of eyes in some situations, people behave more honestly. So you draw an eye. So the study one of the studies, a very famous study that people did was by, I think in the old days in our companies, or, in your CBC, I guess. So you have coffee maker there and you have to pay into it. But you make a coffee, take a cup, and you put a quarter in it, right? It turned out that most people cheat in this situation all over the world. So they don't pay up. So they just take coffee and they go away, right? So this happens at any level, regardless of, education level. The study was done in the university because people cheat, your professors cheat at the coffee machine. So what they did was they put a pair of eyes on top of the coffee maker. And just by doing that, the money now start to come in. So just simply to give you a very, very subtle message, someone is watching you,
Yeah.
then you'll be
maybe they need to do that during the exams. They have a pair of eyes at the front.
Exactly. So, I don't know. People have done this. Yes. No, that's a good idea. Yes.
That is fascinating. So, and I'm sure this is something that people are questioning today. Do we know whether the prevalence of lying sort of generally among the population, has it increased over the years? Has it, I don't know. Does that follow? Do they see trends? I don't know if that's studied. The people have been asking these questions. So the only thing I can look at is the historical research about this. So, the earliest study about lying the paper was written by Charles Darwin about his own child, one sample, right? One participant. So in 1928, around that time, and there was a group of researchers led by called Harshon and May. So they actually did a series of studies in eastern states of the United States, and then look at kids cheating and lying. And now I'm looking at this all over the world, and the rate of lying and cheating have not changed. So they're more or less the same. So this is 1928, right? In the 1920s. And then I'm talking about 20,000, right? So the before and after. So I think the overall rates of cheating and lying probably have not changed dramatically, I would say. So, but maybe we become more aware of this. So we talk about this. Just considering all the research you've done and just the knowledge you have in this area, I'm wondering what conclusions have you come to when it comes to, human behavior and lying and just, the nature of who we are? What have you concluded?
So my conclusion is, number one, I think most of us behave morally, behave pro-socially to each other. And the reason is not because we have very good heart in ourselves, like we are moral people, we are pro-social people, but because being pro-social, being moral actually is the most adaptive for you to live in a social environment in our society. So if you behave immorally, you behave antisocially, you are not going to survive. You're going to be marginalized. So just basically being immoral, being dishonest, being distrustful does not pay. But being moral, being pro-social actually pays. To think about all our people in our environment, our friends we make, they tend to be very pro-social. They tend to be moral. The reason for that is that's the best way for us to adapt to the environment we have created as a social group, as a social animal, right? So to me, the fundamental thing is not about you have moral ideas in your head. You use that to guide your behavior, but just the environment that we have created is just happen to be for pro-social, for morality.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's so you're saying, it's not because of any sort of moral compulsion on our part that we think, oh, this is good, we need to behave in this way. No, we actually need to behave in this way to survive.
Yes,
as exactly. A species altogether. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, okay, I'll take that. That still works. That still works. Oh my goodness. So fascinating. Kang, thank you so much. Continued success with all your work. And I hope we have you on again to talk about new research you're doing.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Mary. It was fun to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. Kang Lee is a professor in applied psychology and human development at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. He studies moral development and the development of lying in children and young adults. Now, for more information on Dr. Lee's work, including his fascinating TED Talk that he gave on the subject, you can check out our show notes. That's it for this edition of the Cram Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. And our thanks to the Temerty Foundation for their generous support. And you might be interested in our literary podcast. It's called Passage to Wonderland. I highlight compelling passages from books that offer discovery, insight, and a sense of completion for the end of a busy day. You'll find Passage to Wonderland wherever you find your Cram Podcast. Thanks very much for joining us, and see you here next time.